Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second part of the female reproductive system. Before we get into the details of the last part of the female system, I just want to review the ovary and the kind of development of the egg first. So, this is a zoom in of the ovary, and you can see there is a blood supply. You can see veins and arteries. And the primary follicle, primary means first, that's where the kind of, if you want to be, the beginning of the egg formation happens, if that's what you want to say. And that's going to happen through the primary follicle. You're going to see it growing inside. You're going to see it growing in this kind of protective layer there. Then on about the 14th day of the cycle, the now primary follicle, known as a secondary oocyte, is released in the process known as ovulation. And then this corpus luteum forms in this color picture. It's this yellow kind of cauliflowery looking thing, and that will eventually degenerate. But the corpus luteum is going to produce progesterone, and that's going to help in implantation of the egg if it gets fertilized. So we talked about the cycle of the hormones during the course of the menstrual cycle in females. So that's the kind of refresher on the ovary. So now ovulation, once again, we talked a little bit about it, but this is the release of this thing known as the secondary oocyte, and we can say the egg, basically, or the mature ova. And this cell will contain what is known as the N number of chromosomes. Remember, so in a human, which we did, the humans have 46 chromosomes. Dad's sperm had 23. Mom has 46 chromosomes, but her egg is only going to have 23. So when the egg and the sperm get fertilized, your 23 plus 23 gives you 46 for the new baby. So the numbers are important. So the N, once again, is half of the chromosomes of the individual. So in humans, that number is 23. And the ovulation will happen on the 14th day of the cycle. Remember, not the 14th day of the month, so don't get that confused. Here is a kind of what's up. Now, this is a little bit on the long side, but your period, if you will, is the beginning of the cycle, and this has 7 days. In some women is a little bit less, but that's what's going on there. Then, as the egg is maturing, again, you can't feel that, but it's happening in your ovaries. Then you have ovulation, which again is going to happen on day 14, according to the 9 million times I told you, but they gave you a window here. That's why you cannot have unprotected sex and think that you have your cycle figured out, because ovulation can be altered from hormones or stress or whatever, and if you are off by just 1 day, then you may become pregnant, so you got to be careful. Then on the last couple of days, you have the corpus luteum, which releases progesterone, and then the cycle starts all over again. So, but the thing with ovulation is, and I didn't mean to say, you don't want to get pregnant. I didn't mean to say that. In the same avenue, if you are trying to get pregnant, that ovulation on day 14 is, again, a guess. So when you go to fertility clinics, they will try to narrow that down to help target when would be the best time to get pregnant. So please don't take it the wrong way. I'm sorry if I said that. The corpus luteum is essential for establishing and maintaining pregnancy. So that is what that kind of flower-shaped thing, and it's going to release progesterone. And that is going to happen after ovulation. Remember, you don't have to worry about implanting an egg if there is no egg. So after it's released, that's when the progesterone will be released. Here again is a little bit more crazy looking detailed ovary, but there's your primary follicle, there's ovulation, there's your corpus luteum. And I just wanted to give you a bunch of different kind of versions of the same thing so you can see what's going on. Well, most times women, especially younger women, will have you'll get your period and you'll release your egg, and you will not have any sperm in the area, or you have not had sex, and then that egg will simply just be released. So your body goes through this kind of building of the inside of the uterus and the release and the building and the release and so on. So if the egg is not fertilized. The corpus luteum stops secreting progesterone after a couple of days, and the inner lining of the uterus is shed. The unfertilized egg is released out with that shedding of the lining, and then you start the process all over again. If the egg is fertilized, meaning there is sperm there, then a whole other set of kind of reactions happens. So if the egg is fertilized and implantation occurs, so remember, there's two parts of the story. First, the egg has to be fertilized, and then it has to implant. So if it doesn't implant, then you're obviously not pregnant. So once it implants, then you're going to start producing or releasing or secreting, whatever you want to say, HCG. And that is what is used in pregnancy tests. So after just a couple of days, and if you listen to these commercials on pregnancy tests, they're all about early detection. So once the egg is implanted, then the body starts to produce this HCG, and the process gets started. So that, again, fertilization and implantation. That's if the egg is fertilized. Now, here's where a lot of people kind of don't really understand what's going on, and this is where you have to, kind of just take a step back and look at the diagram. This is your fallopian tube right here. So you have your ovary, which you have your uterus is over here, and your fallopian tubes. Now, if you notice, look where fertilization happens. Fertilization happens very soon after ovulation. So what happens is, if this individual had, sex, the sperm was released into the uterus. It then used its tail to swim along down the fallopian tube. And if there happens to be an egg there, fertilization will occur in the fallopian tubes. Now, here's the thing that, again, a lot of you don't understand, or you probably were never taught this. After the egg is fertilized, it's only one egg. Okay? Just one egg. Then that one egg, known as the zygote, that one cell known as the zygote, will then begin to divide. So it takes a few days while still in the fallopian tube for the cell to divide. One cell turns into two, two turns into four, four turns into 8. That's here. Then, now, this kind of starting to be a ball of cells, if you will, has now been dividing for a few days. After about a week, it can implant itself. So that amount of time is important. A lot of people think that fertilization happens in the uterus, and it doesn't. It could, but if it did, the body wouldn't know you were pregnant yet. It would shed that lining along with the fertilized egg, because it takes a long time, for a few days, for all of this kind of mitosis to happen before the cell can implant. So remember, the big take-home message is eggs are fertilized in the fallopian tube, and the cell has to divide a few times before it can implant, about a week, maybe a week and a half later. So here is, again, an overall fancy diagram, but now let's talk about the ovaries themselves. So the ovaries are not actually connected to the fallopian tube, but what has to hold the ovaries from just floating away, and that is known as the ovarian ligament. So you can see that's right there. So that's kind of being held to the uterus, but believe it or not, there's no actual connection right there, which I know sounds crazy. So the ovaries are supported by the ovarian ligament. The ovarian ligament is, again, muscular and fibrous, and it extends from the uterus to the ovary, and it holds it in. And if it wasn't there, your ovaries would float away in your abdomen, and that would be bad. Again, here's the same picture again. Now, the uterine tubes, that's what we talked about where fertilization happens. They're going to receive the oocyte, aka the egg. They are where fertilization will happen if it happens. The fallopian tubes are attached to the uterus, not to the ovary, though, which is kind of cool. They do not physically attach to the ovary. And the fallopian tubes are held in place in your abdomen by what is known as the broad ligament. So if you see here, the broad ligament is kind of this behind, kind of like shield thing. So the ovarian ligament holds the ovaries, and the broad ligament holds the fallopian tubes and the uterus and everything in place. Because, again, if it didn't, it would it would settle down too low in your abdomen, and that would be bad. The uterine tubes have an end. The fimbriae kind of looks like a Dr. Seuss hand, I was used to say. So it's kind of looks like something like that. And that's the end of the fallopian tube. Remember, the ovary is going to be right there, and the egg will be released and then go right into the fallopian tube. Inside of the uterine tube or fallopian tube, there are these little cilia. That's what helps the egg move along. And then if there is fertilization, that takes place in the fallopian or uterine tubes. The uterus itself. Now, the uterus itself is behind the bladder, and it is a hollow muscular organ. You'll know that when you are kind of beginning and during your period, where that hollow organ is contracting, and that's what sometimes will cause cramping in ladies. That muscular organ is also what will be used to push the baby out when on the day of the baby is born. So it's pretty important. And it has a bunch of functions, obviously. It's going to receive the fertilized egg. It's going to retain the fertilized egg. And then it will actually nourish the fertilized egg with something known as the placenta. So you can see here, there's your uterus right there. It's kind of above/behind your bladder. And obviously when there's a baby in there, we talked about it last time, it's going to push on the bladder, which could cause you to feel like you have to go to the bathroom a lot, on top of the fact that your doctor is probably saying drink a lot of water. As for the uterus itself, it's a 3-part story. It has the body, that's the main portion, that is the muscular portion where the baby will be developing. The fundus is where the uterine tube enters, and the cervix is the bottom. So that's your uterine tubes right there. That's your other uterine tube right there. The area where it connects, that right there is the fundus. Then the uterus itself, that's the main body, that's the muscular body where the baby will develop if it is there. And then finally at the end, you have your cervix. And it's kind of tough, and that will dissolve when the baby is about to be born. So there is again another diagram, which you'll probably see on your test. Now, inside of the uterus, let's back it up. There is an outside, there is a middle, and there is an inside, like everything else we've talked about. So the endometrium, that's the inner layer, that is what will be shed if you are not pregnant, and that is what will allow the egg to implant if you are pregnant. So that inner lining is extremely important. And then the myometrium, that's where the muscles are in that middle layer. And again, that's also important to help get rid of that inner layer if you don't need it each month, and also help push the baby out when the baby is ready to be born. So the 2 layers, endo and myometrium, are very important in the uterus. Now, as for the vagina, otherwise known as the birth canal, that is, again, a 2-part story. It's going to receive the penis during sexual intercourse, and it will also be a way for the baby to exit mom's body. So that's its 2 roles. And in a young lady, the hymen is this kind of layer of skin that partially closes the vagina until it is ruptured. Now, in some cases, that does not happen until a lady has sex for the first time. Or it could happen through maybe an injury, or maybe through sports too. So sometimes you will see a little bit of blood, and you're like, how did that happen? But it could have been your hymen being damaged from sports. So again, your vagina is right here, and it is your birth canal right there. As for the external genitalia, there's not a lot in the ladies that is going to be a lot to talk about, but you have the mons pubis, and that, again, these are the outer areas, kind of in your pubic area, and as you get older, it will be covered with pubic hair. And of course, you have your other folds of your external genitalia, but again, we're not going to see too much of that on this test. How about the making of eggs? Now, we talked about this in meiosis, but here it is again in the end of the female system. The day you are born, ladies, you have every single egg that you will need for your entire life. Now, they're all not mature, obviously, and they're not ready because you were just born. But as you go through puberty, these eggs are going to mature, one per month, and eventually you will reach menopause, but that'll be later. And your egg is huge, 130 micrometers. That is actually visible under a regular microscope, a school microscope. So compared to the sperm, it is humongous. We're going to get into any of this stuff here. Nah, skip right over that. And the one thing, though, you do need to know, and we said it last time, is in the production of the egg, you're going to have one egg and you're going to have 3 polar bodies. So that's how that's going to go. So as a kind of wrap up, we learned about the structures. We reviewed the ovary and what happens there. We talked about the maturing of the egg. We talked about if the egg is fertilized or it's not fertilized. And we wrapped up with a review of oogenesis, or making of that one egg. And again, important to understand, the egg, just like the sperm, has half of the chromosomes of the parent. So that is the female system, and hopefully that was helpful.